Before we explore how medieval travelers stayed clean while moving from place to place, it helps to pause and gently let go of our modern idea of cleanliness. Today, cleanliness often means white surfaces, bright lights, the sharp scent of soap, and the feeling of water rushing endlessly from a tap. But in the medieval world, cleanliness was quieter, softer, and far more practical. To be clean did not mean to be spotless. It did not mean to smell pleasant by modern standards, and it did not mean to bathe daily or even weekly. Instead, cleanliness was understood in terms of balance. Balance between the body and the environment, between dryness and dampness, between warmth and cold, between comfort and survival. For a medieval traveler, being clean enough meant being able to continue the journey without falling ill, without offending others, and without drawing unwanted attention. This idea of cleanliness was shaped not by luxury, but by necessity. In the Middle Ages, most people lived close to the land. They worked outdoors. They handled animals, soil, wood, and stone. Dirt was not something unusual. It was part of everyday life. Because of this, dirt itself was not automatically seen as unhealthy. What mattered more was stagnation, moisture that lingered too long on the skin, clothing that stayed damp for days, air that did not circulate, waste that accumulated too close to living spaces. These things were noticed, felt, smelled, and even without knowing about bacteria or germs, people understood that certain conditions led to sickness. So cleanliness was not about removing every trace of dirt. It was about preventing imbalance. Medical ideas of the medieval world also shaped how people thought about hygiene. At the time, health was believed to depend on the balance of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Too much heat, too much cold, too much moisture, or too much dryness could throw the body into disorder. Because of this, sudden or extreme bathing was often viewed with suspicion. Cold water could shock the body. Hot baths could open the pores too much, allowing illness to enter. For travelers whose bodies were already under strain, moderation was essential. Cleanliness, therefore, was approached gently. Travel itself was slow. A person on foot might walk only 15 to 20 miles in a day. Merchants with carts move even slower. Pilgrims stopped frequently. Roads were dusty in summer, muddy in spring, frozen in winter. Travelers expected to arrive dirty. It was normal. It was understood. What mattered more was how they managed that dirt over time. Small, repeated actions mattered far more than dramatic efforts. To medieval eyes, a person who wiped their hands regularly, changed their linen, aired their clothing, and washed their face was considered reasonably clean. This level of care signaled responsibility. It suggested that the traveler was not careless or diseased. Inns, monasteries, and private homes often judged travelers quickly based on appearance, smell, and behavior. Someone who appeared moderately clean was more likely to be welcomed, offered food, or allowed a place near the fire. Cleanliness was social as much as physical. Smell played an important role in these judgments. In a world without modern sanitation, strong smells were everywhere. Animals lived close to people. Waste disposal was limited. Smoke filled homes. Because of this, people developed a high tolerance for ordinary odors. What stood out were smells associated with decay, infection, or neglect. A traveler who smelled strongly of rot or whose clothing was stiff with old grime might be avoided. But the faint scent of sweat, dust, or wool was simply part of life. This understanding allowed medieval travelers a certain freedom. They did not need to erase every sign of travel. They only needed to show care. The idea of cleanliness also differed depending on social class. Nobles traveling with servants had more opportunities to maintain comfort. They could carry extra clothing. They might stop at estates or monasteries. But most travelers were ordinary people: pilgrims, craftsmen, messengers, seasonal workers. Their hygiene routines had to be simple, portable, and repeatable. Cleanliness had to fit into a pack, into a pocket, into a quiet moment beside a stream. There is something almost meditative about these routines. To pause at the edge of the road, dip hands into cold water, and gently wash away dust. To remove an inner garment at night, shake it free of debris, and hang it where air can pass through. These were moments of care, moments of stillness. Even while traveling, people found small ways to tend to themselves. Modern ideas often paint the medieval world as endlessly filthy, but this image is misleading. While standards were different, people were not indifferent to their bodies. They noticed discomfort. They noticed rashes, sores, and fevers.
They learned through experience what made them feel better and what made things worse. Over generations, this quiet knowledge shaped daily habits. For travelers especially, illness can mean disaster. There were no easy hospitals along the road, no quick cures. Staying well enough to walk another day was essential, so cleanliness became part of survival. Not dramatic, not obsessive, but steady. As we move forward in this story, we'll see how this understanding of cleanliness shaped clothing choices, washing habits, hair care, and even sleeping arrangements. Each practice was small, simple, often repeated. Together, they formed a system that allowed people to cross long distances in a world without modern hygiene. For now, take a quiet moment to imagine yourself there, standing at the edge of a medieval road, the air cool, the dust settling, clean enough, comfortably enough.
For medieval travelers, cleanliness did not begin with water. It began with clothing. Long before soap was common, and long before bathing was frequent, people relied on fabric to protect their bodies, manage sweat, and create a barrier between skin and the outside world. Clothing was not only about warmth or modesty, it was one of the most important tools for staying healthy on the road, and every layer had a purpose. Most travelers wore at least 2 layers of clothing. Closest to the skin was linen. Linen was made from flax, a plant that grew well in many parts of Europe. The fabric was light, breathable, and relatively smooth against the skin. More importantly, linen absorbed sweat and body oils. Instead of those substances staying on the skin, where they could cause irritation or infection, they were drawn into the fabric. This made linen an ideal inner layer for long days of walking. Over the linen came wool. Wool was heavier, thicker, and far more weather-resistant. It repelled light rain, it trapped warmth even when damp, and it protected the body from wind and cold. Wool was not usually washed often. Instead, it was brushed, aired, and shaken out. This division of labor between fabrics was intentional. Linen absorbed dirt and sweat. Wool shielded the body from the environment. Together, they formed a simple but effective system. At the end of a day's travel, a medieval traveler might remove their outer garments and focus their attention on the linen beneath. The linen shirt, or shift, was the part of clothing most closely associated with cleanliness. If the linen was reasonably clean, the person was considered reasonably clean. Even nobles followed this practice. Clean linen against the skin was a sign of care, discipline, and good health. Washing linen did not require large amounts of water. A traveler could rinse it in a stream, a trough, or even a bucket borrowed from an inn. Soap was not always necessary. Cold water alone removed much of the sweat and grime. Sometimes the fabric was scrubbed gently against itself, sometimes against smooth stones. The goal was not perfection. The goal was freshness. Drying was just as important as washing. Damp clothing was dangerous. It chilled the body. It incurred skin problems, and it trapped odors. Travelers took care to dry linen thoroughly, hung over a bush in the sun, spread across a warm stone, laid near but not too close to a hearth. Air and time did much of the work. Not every traveler washed their linen daily, but many aired it every night. Even this simple step made a difference. Air helped evaporate moisture. It reduced smell. It discouraged parasites. Sometimes linen was turned inside out and hung where the breeze could pass through. These quiet habits were learned through experience. Travelers often carried more than one linen garment. This allowed them to rotate, one worn during the day, one airing or drying at night. Even a single extra shirt could greatly improve comfort on a long journey. For those who could afford it, this small luxury was well worth the space it took. Wool garments required different care. They were not washed frequently, as water could cause shrinking and damage. Instead, wool was brushed. Simple brushes made from stiff fibers were used to remove dust and dried mud. Clothing was shaken vigorously, often outside or away from sleeping areas. This removed loose dirt and insects. Once again, air was essential. Wool garments were aired whenever possible. Travelers were careful not to sleep in damp wool. If rain had soaked their cloak, they would remove it and allow it to dry overnight. Sleeping in wet clothing was a known risk. Cold and illness followed quickly, so even in uncomfortable conditions, people tried to keep at least one layer dry. Footwear also played a role in hygiene. Shoes were often made of leather, and they absorbed sweat and moisture. At the end of the day, travelers removed their shoes and allowed their feet to breathe. Shoes were set aside, sometimes stuffed with straw or cloth to help them keep their shape as they dried. Feet were aired whenever possible. This reduced blisters, fungal infections, and general discomfort. Hosiery, worn beneath trousers or tunics, was another layer that absorbed sweat. Like linen shirts, hose could be washed or rinsed more easily than outer garments. Clean hose made long walks more bearable, a small detail but an important one. Head coverings served multiple functions. Hoods, caps, and hats protected from sun and rain. They absorbed sweat. They kept dust out of hair.
Many travelers wore head coverings almost constantly. At night, these could be removed and aired. Some were washed occasionally, especially if made of linen. Keeping the head covering was practical hygiene, not just custom. Clothing also protected the skin from injury. Scratches, insect bites, and sunburn were all more dangerous in the medieval world. Without modern medicine, even small wounds could become serious. Fabric acted as a barrier. Long sleeves, high collars, wrapped garments. These reduced exposure and helped prevent infection. Repair was part of cleanliness. Torn clothing trapped dirt. Loose seams wrapped the skin. Travelers often carried needles and thread. Mending was done in the evening by firelight, in quiet moments. A well-maintained garment lasted longer and protected better. Care for clothing was care for the body. Color also mattered. Darker colors hid stains. Lighter linens showed dirt more clearly, but were associated with cleanliness. Many travelers balanced practicality and appearance. A clean-looking traveler was treated better. They were trusted more easily, offered shelter more readily. Clothing sent signals. The smell of clothing was also important. Freshly aired linen had a neutral scent. Wool, when clean and dry, had a faint natural scent. These were acceptable. Strong odors suggest neglect or illness. Some travelers tucked herbs into their garments. Lavender, rosemary, sage. Not to overpower scent, but to soften it. As days passed on the road, clothing became familiar. Each garment carried the marks of travel, but through careful attention, washing linen, airing wool, drying shoes, mending tears, travelers maintained a balance. Not pristine, but functional. Not luxurious, but healthy. There was something quietly reassuring about these routines. Each evening brought a small ritual, removing layers, shaking dust away, letting fabric breathe, a pause between journeys, a moment of care. As we move forward, we'll look more closely at water itself, how medieval travelers washed, without baths, without privacy, and without abundance. For now, imagine the feel of clean linen against tired skin, dry, softened by use, ready for another day on the road.
For medieval travelers, washing did not mean bathing. There were no long tubs waiting at the end of the road, no private rooms filled with steam, no steady supply of warm water. And yet, washing still happened, quietly, simply, in small, careful ways. Cleanliness on the road was built not on immersion, but on repetition. Small acts, done often, were more important than rare, dramatic efforts. Water was precious, not because it was rare, but because it was unpredictable. Streams ran clear in some places and muddy in others. Wells varied in quality. Rain could be abundant or absent for weeks. Travelers learned quickly to respect water. They did not waste it. They did not rush its use. Instead, they worked with what was available. The most common form of washing was partial. Hands, face, feet. These were the parts of the body most exposed to dirt and most closely associated with health. Clean hands mattered for eating. Clean faces mattered for breathing and comfort. Clean feet mattered for movement. By focusing on these areas, travelers reduced illness without exhausting their limited resources. At the edge of a stream, a traveler might kneel and cup water gently. Hands were rinsed first, dust loosened, sweat washed away. Fingers were rubbed together slowly, working grime out from beneath nails. This was not rushed. Cold water encouraged care. Faces were washed next. Eyes, nose, and mouth collected dust throughout the day. Washing reduced irritation and helped prevent infection. Sometimes a cloth was used, sometimes bare hands. Water was splashed lightly, never forced. In colder weather, this was done quickly to avoid chilling. Feet required special attention. Walking for hours caused swelling, blisters, and soreness. Travelers often removed shoes and soaked their feet briefly. Cold water soothed heat and inflammation. Afterward, feet were dried carefully. A damp foot invited trouble. Fungal infections, sores, and discomfort could end a journey early. Soap was not always used. In fact, plain water was more common. Soap existed, but it was harsh and not always kind to skin. Many soaps were made from animal fat and ash. They cleaned well, but could dry or irritate the body. Travelers used soap sparingly. When they did, it was often reserved for hands or clothing. Cloths were essential tools. A simple piece of linen served many purposes: washing, drying, covering wounds, filtering water. Cloths were easy to rinse and dry. They folded neatly into packs. Many travelers carried one specifically for washing. It became softer over time, more familiar, more trusted. When water was scarce, cloths were dampened lightly rather than soaked.
Even a small amount of moisture could refresh the skin. These gentle washings were surprisingly effective. They removed salt from sweat. They eased irritation. They restored comfort. Bathing, when it did occur, was approached cautiously. Public bathhouses existed in some towns and cities, but travelers did not rely on them. Bathhouses could be expensive, crowded, and sometimes associated with illness. Full immersion was often avoided, especially after long travel. Medical thought warned that bathing could open the pores, allowing sickness to enter the body. For someone already tired and exposed, this risk was taken seriously. When travelers did bathe, it was often done gradually. Feet first, hands, then arms. The body adjusted slowly. Sudden temperature changes were avoided. Moderation was key. Rain offered another opportunity for washing. Travelers sometimes welcomed light rain. They might remove head coverings and allow water to rinse hair and face. Heavy rain was uncomfortable, but gentle rainfall could be refreshing. Clothing was still dried carefully afterward. Rainwater washed dirt away, but dampness remained a concern. In inns and monasteries, washing was sometimes more structured. A bowl of water might be provided, a pitcher placed nearby. Travelers washed quietly, often in shared spaces. Privacy was limited, but modesty was maintained through custom. No one lingered. Washing was practical, not indulgent. Monasteries were often the cleanest places along the road. Monks valued routine and order. Cleanliness supported discipline. Travelers welcomed the chance to wash properly under a roof. But even here, water was used carefully. No excess, no waste. Hair washing was infrequent. Hair was brushed far more often than washed. When washed, it was usually done in warm weather. Cold water on the head in winter was believed to cause illness. Travelers might rinse hair lightly, then dry it thoroughly in the sun or near a fire. Oils from the scalp protected the hair and reduced dryness. Beards were washed even less often. They were combed, trimmed, and aired. Water was used sparingly. A damp beard in cold air was uncomfortable and risky. Travelers were attentive to their skin. Rashes, chafing, and sores were common. Washing removed irritants and allowed the skin to heal. Some travelers carried salves or oils. Rendered animal fat mixed with herbs soothed dryness and protected wounds. Clean skin healed better. Nighttime washing was often more important than morning washing. After a day's travel, removing dirt prevented it from being pressed into the skin overnight. Travelers washed before sleep whenever possible. Even a quick rinse made rest more comfortable. Clean skin rested better. Morning washing was lighter. A splash of water, a quick wipe, enough to wake the body without chilling it. Routine mattered more than thoroughness. Over time, these habits became instinctive. Travelers did not think of them as hygiene. They thought of them as care. Care for the body, care for the journey. These practices were passed down quietly, not through books, but through observation. A child learned by watching. A novice learned by copying. Experience taught what worked. In this way, washing without baths became a system. Gentle, efficient, adaptable. It allowed people to travel long distances in a world without modern convenience. As we move forward, we'll turn our attention upward to hair, beards, and head coverings, the small routines that kept travelers comfortable, presentable, and free from pests. For now, imagine cool water on tired hands, a soft cloth, a quiet pause, simple care on a long road.
For medieval travelers, washing did not mean bathing. There were no long tubs waiting at the end of the road, no private rooms filled with steam, no steady supply of warm water. And yet, washing still happened, quietly, simply, in small, careful ways. Cleanliness on the road was built not on immersion, but on repetition. Small acts, done often, were more important than rare, dramatic efforts. Water was precious, not because it was rare, but because it was unpredictable. Streams ran clear in some places and muddy in others. Wells varied in quality. Rain could be abundant or absent for weeks. Travelers learned quickly to respect water. They did not waste it. They did not rush its use. Instead, they worked with what was available. The most common form of washing was partial: hands, face, feet. These were the parts of the body most exposed to dirt and most closely associated with health. Clean hands mattered for eating. Clean faces mattered for breathing and comfort. Clean feet mattered for movement. By focusing on these areas, travelers reduced illness, without exhausting their limited resources. At the edge of a stream, a traveler might kneel and cup water gently. Hands were rinsed first, dust loosened, sweat washed away. Fingers were rubbed together slowly, working grime out from beneath nails. This was not rushed. Cold water encouraged care. Faces were washed next. Eyes, nose, and mouth collected dust throughout the day. Washing reduced irritation and helped prevent infection. Sometimes a cloth was used, sometimes bare hands. Water was splashed lightly, never forced. In colder weather, this was done quickly to avoid chilling. Feet required special attention. Walking for hours caused swelling, blisters, and soreness. Travelers often removed shoes and soaked their feet briefly. Cold water soothed heat and inflammation. Afterward, feet were dried carefully. A damp foot invited trouble. Fungal infections, sores, and discomfort could end a journey early. Soap was not always used. In fact, plain water was more common. Soap existed, but it was harsh and not always kind to skin. Many soaps were made from animal fat and ash. They cleaned well, but could dry or irritate the body. Travelers used soap sparingly. When they did, it was often reserved for hands or clothing. Cloths were essential tools. A simple piece of linen served many purposes: washing, drying, covering wounds, filtering water. Cloths were easy to rinse and dry. They folded neatly into packs. Many travelers carried one specifically for washing. It became softer over time, more familiar, more trusted. When water was scarce, cloths were dampened lightly rather than soaked. Even a small amount of moisture could refresh the skin. These gentle washings were surprisingly effective. They removed salt from sweat. They eased irritation. They restored comfort. Bathing, when it did occur, was approached cautiously. Public bathhouses existed in some towns and cities, but travelers did not rely on them. Bathhouses could be expensive, crowded, and sometimes associated with illness. Full immersion was often avoided, especially after long travel. Medical thought warned that bathing could open the pores, allowing sickness to enter the body. For someone already tired and exposed, this risk was taken seriously. When travelers did bathe, it was often done gradually. Feet first, hands, then arms. The body adjusted slowly. Sudden temperature changes were avoided. Moderation was key. Rain offered another opportunity for washing. Travelers sometimes welcomed light rain. They might remove head coverings and allow water to rinse hair and face. Heavy rain was uncomfortable, but gentle rainfall could be refreshing. Clothing was still dried carefully afterward. Rainwater washed dirt away, but dampness remained a concern. In inns and monasteries, washing was sometimes more structured. A bowl of water might be provided, a pitcher placed nearby. Travelers washed quietly, often in shared spaces. Privacy was limited, but modesty was maintained through custom. No one lingered. Washing was practical, not indulgent. Monasteries were often the cleanest places along the road. Monks valued routine and order. Cleanliness supported discipline. Travelers welcomed the chance to wash properly under a roof. But even here, water was used carefully. No excess, no waste. Hair washing was infrequent. Hair was brushed far more often than washed. When washed, it was usually done in warm weather. Cold water on the head in winter was believed to cause illness. Travelers might rinse hair lightly, then dry it thoroughly in the sun or near a fire. Oils from the scalp protected the hair and reduced dryness. Beards were washed even less often. They were combed, trimmed, and aired. Water was used sparingly. A damp beard in cold air was uncomfortable and risky. Travelers were attentive to their skin. Rashes, chafing, and sores were common. Washing removed irritants and allowed the skin to heal. Some travelers carried salves or oils. Rendered animal fat mixed with herbs soothed dryness and protected wounds. Clean skin healed better. Nighttime washing was often more important than morning washing. After a day's travel, removing dirt prevented it from being pressed into the skin overnight. Travelers washed before sleep whenever possible. Even a quick rinse made rest more comfortable. Clean skin rested better. Morning washing was lighter. A splash of water, a quick wipe, enough to wake the body without chilling it. Routine mattered more than thoroughness. Over time, these habits became instinctive. Travelers did not think of them as hygiene. They thought of them as care. Care for the body, care for the journey. These practices were passed down quietly, not through books, but through observation. A child learned by watching. A novice learned by copying. Experience taught what worked. In this way,
Washing without baths became a system. Gentle, efficient, adaptable. It allowed people to travel long distances in a world without modern convenience. As we move forward, we'll turn our attention upward to hair, beards, and head coverings, the small routines that kept travelers comfortable, presentable, and free from pests. For now, imagine cool water on tired hands, a soft cloth, a quiet pause, simple care on a long road.
For medieval travelers, hair required patience. It could not be washed often. It took time to dry. And when neglected, it quickly became uncomfortable. So rather than relying on water, travelers relied on routine. Simple, repeated actions kept hair manageable, clean enough, and free from problems. Hair in the medieval world was usually worn long. Men and women alike allowed their hair to grow, though styles varied by region, class, and custom. Long hair protected the scalp from sun and cold. It also trapped dust, sweat, and insects. Travelers learned quickly that hair required daily attention. Not intense attention, just steady care. The most important tool for hair care was the comb. Combs were common and portable. They were carved from wood, bone, or horn. Some were finely made. Others were simple and rough. What mattered was function. A comb removed dust. It loosened debris. It caught lice and nits. Travelers combed their hair slowly, often in the evening. This was done quietly, sometimes beside a fire, sometimes in daylight before resting. Combing served more than one purpose. It untangled hair. It distributed natural oils from the scalp. It improved comfort. But most importantly, it controlled parasites. Lice were common in the medieval world. They were not seen as a sign of moral failure. They were simply part of life. But they were managed. Regular combing removed many lice before they could multiply. Fine-toothed combs were especially effective. Travelers often combed one another's hair. This was practical, and it was social. A second set of eyes caught what the first might miss. Families did this naturally. Companions on pilgrimage or trade routes did the same. These moments were calm and unhurried. Care shared between people. Hair washing was infrequent. Water was cold, drying took time, and wet hair in cold weather was dangerous. Instead, hair was kept clean through brushing, combing, and covering. When washing did occur, it was usually done in warm weather. Travelers might rinse hair in a stream, then sit in the sun until it dried. Soap was rarely used on hair. It was harsh and stripped oils completely. Natural oils were valued. They protected hair from dryness and breakage. Beards required similar care. Many men wore beards while traveling. They offered warmth and protection, but they also collected food, dust, and moisture. Beards were combed daily, sometimes trimmed with small knives or shears. Water was used sparingly. A damp cloth wiped away surface dirt. Beards were dried carefully. A wet beard in cold air was uncomfortable and discouraged. Head coverings were essential. Almost every traveler wore something on their head. Hoods, caps, hats, scarves. These items served multiple purposes. They protected from sun and rain. They absorbed sweat. They kept dust out of hair. They also reduced the need for frequent washing. A hood was especially practical. Attached to a cloak or worn separately, it could be raised or lowered easily. In rain, it shielded the head. In wind, it trapped warmth. In dust, it acted as a barrier. Hoods could be aired or washed more easily than hair. Many were lined with linen, which absorbed moisture and oils. Caps were common as well. Simple cloth caps were worn under hoods or hats. They kept hair contained and reduced irritation. Caps were easy to wash and dry. This made them an important part of hygiene. A clean cap meant cleaner hair. Head coverings also protected against insects. Flies, gnats, and lice were less likely to reach the scalp. This reduced irritation and the spread of parasites. Travelers often slept with head coverings nearby, ready to be worn again in the morning. At night, head coverings were removed and aired. Sweat evaporated, moisture dried. If possible, caps were rinsed and dried overnight. This simple act improved comfort the next day. Hair was often tied or braided. Loose hair tangled easily on the road. Braids kept hair contained and reduced friction. They were easier to comb and manage. Women commonly braided their hair. Men sometimes did as well. Practicality mattered more than fashion.
Some travelers shaved their heads partially or completely. This was more common among monks or pilgrims. A shaved scalp was easier to keep clean. It reduced lice and required less care. However, shaving required tools and time. Not all travelers chose this option. Oils were sometimes used. A small amount of oil, animal-based or plant-based, was rubbed into hair or beard. This softened hair and protected skin. Herbs might be infused in the oil for scent or comfort. These were used sparingly. Too much oil attracted dust. Moderation was always important. Smell was considered carefully. Strong scents were avoided. Travelers did not aim to smell perfumed. They aimed to smell neutral. Herbs such as rosemary or lavender might be tucked into head coverings. The scent was faint, just enough to soften odors. Cultural expectations shaped hair care. In some regions, uncovered hair was seen as careless or disrespectful. Covering the head showed discipline. It also signaled that a traveler understood local customs. This made interactions smoother. Clean appearance fostered trust. Hair and head care also influenced health. Scratches from lice bites could become infected. Dust and hair irritated the scalp. Routine combing reduced these risks. Comfort mattered. A comfortable traveler rested better. A well-rested traveler stayed healthier. In quiet moments at the end of the day, combing hair became part of winding down. A repetitive motion. A steady rhythm. The day's dust slowly released. The body prepared for rest. These habits were not written rules. They were learned through experience, passed quietly from person to person, observed, imitated. They became second nature. As travelers moved from place to place, their hair and head coverings carried traces of the journey. Sun, wind, dust. But through care, they avoided discomfort and illness. Clean enough, comfortable enough, ready for another day. As we move forward, we'll explore the simple substances travelers used to clean skin, clothing, and tools. Natural cleansers, ash, herbs, and early soaps. Quiet solutions for everyday needs. For now, imagine the slow rhythm of a calm, moving gently through hair. A moment of calm before sleep.
For medieval travelers, cleanliness did not come from abundance. It came from understanding what worked and using it carefully. Without shelves of products, without perfumes or bottled solutions, travelers relied on a small number of simple substances. These materials were familiar, often humble, usually close at hand, and yet they were enough. Soap, as we know it today, was not common. It existed, but it was not gentle, and it was not always easy to obtain. Most soap was made from animal fat combined with ash or lye. The process created a substance that cleaned well, but could be harsh on skin. Travelers knew this. Soap was used deliberately, not casually. When soap was carried on the road, it was often in small amounts, a rough chunk, wrapped in cloth, kept dry. Soap was reserved for specific tasks: washing hands after handling food or animals, cleaning stubborn grime from skin, occasionally washing linen. It was not used daily on the body. Moderation preserved both soap and skin. Many travelers preferred plain water. Water removed most dirt when used regularly. Sweat, dust, and salt did not require strong cleansers if they were addressed early. Gentle washing prevented buildup. This approach reduced irritation and preserved the skin's natural protection. Ash was one of the most common cleaning agents. Softwood ash, left behind after a fire cooled, was mildly abrasive. When mixed with water, it formed a paste that removed grease and dirt. Ash was widely available. Every hearth produced it. Travelers used ash carefully, often on hands or tools. Too much pressure could damage skin. Used gently, it was effective. Sand served a similar purpose. Fine sand removed grime through friction. Travelers used it sparingly, often followed by rinsing. Sand was never used on sensitive skin. Hands and feet tolerated it better. These natural abrasives required patience. Slow rubbing, gentle pressure. Rushing caused injury. Herbs played a quiet role in cleanliness. They were not detergents, but they offered comfort. Some herbs had mild antibacterial properties, others soothed skin. Many provided pleasant, subtle scents: rosemary, sage, lavender, thyme. Travelers gathered herbs along the road or received them from hospitable hosts. Herbs were used in many ways: infused in warm water, rubbed gently on skin, placed among clothing. They softened odors without overwhelming the senses. Strong perfume was avoided. Neutral was preferred. Some travelers carried small amounts of oil, rendered animal fat, or plant-based oils like olive oil. Oil softened dry skin, protected against chafing, helped heal minor wounds. Oil also trapped dirt if overused, so it was applied lightly.
a thin layer, rubbed in carefully. Oil and ash were sometimes combined. This created a primitive cleanser that cut grease effectively. Such mixtures were used cautiously. Hands, tools, and occasionally hair benefited from this treatment. Skin was rinsed thoroughly afterward. Early soaps varied widely in quality. Some were crumbly, some were sticky, some had strong odors. Soap-making knowledge differed by region. Travelers learned through experience which soaps were worth carrying. Inferior soap was avoided. A poor soap irritated skin and discouraged washing. Soap was rarely scented heavily. Scent came from herbs, not chemicals. A faint herbal note was enough. Travelers did not seek fragrance. They sought comfort. Washing clothing required more effort. Linen responded well to water and gentle soap. Wool required caution. Soap removed natural oils from wool, reducing its ability to repel water. Travelers washed wool only when necessary. More often, they brushed and ironed it. Tools also required cleansing. Knives, bowls, cups, and spoons were washed regularly. Clean tools reduced illness. Ash and water removed grease. A rinse completed the task. Travelers took pride in clean tools. They represented order. Hands were washed frequently, before eating, after handling animals, after working. This habit was widespread. Even without understanding germs, people noticed that clean hands prevented sickness. It became instinctive. Some travelers used vinegar. Vinegar cleaned surfaces. It reduced odors. It preserved tools. A small bottle went a long way. Vinegar stung unbroken skin, so it was used carefully. Salt also had uses. It dried moisture, reduced odor, preserved wounds temporarily. Salt was precious, so it wasn't wasted. Used lightly, it offered benefit. Natural cleansers were part of a broader philosophy. Nothing was wasted. Everything had multiple uses. Fire produced ash. Ash cleaned tools. Tools prepared food. A simple cycle. Travelers observed these relationships. They learned to work with the environment, not against it. Cleansing was rarely rushed. Time was taken. Rushing caused mistakes, skin damage, waste. A calm approach worked better. Slow movements, gentle pressure. The rhythm of care mattered. Nighttime was ideal for cleansing. The day's work was done. The body was tired. Washing became a quiet ritual. Hands, face, feet, then rest. Morning cleansing was lighter. A splash of water, a quick wipe, enough to wake the body without stripping it. Balance was maintained. These practices were passed down through observation, not instruction. Children watch adults. Apprentices watch masters. Knowledge moved quietly. Over time, travelers learned what suited them. Some preferred ash. Others avoided it. Some used soap sparingly. Others not at all. Personal experience guided choice. Despite simplicity, these methods were effective. People traveled long distances. They remained functional. They avoided serious illness. Not perfect, but sufficient. As we move forward, we'll step inside the places where travelers rested. Inns, monasteries, shared sleeping spaces, and the quiet routines that help travelers stay clean there. For now, imagine warm water in a bowl, a pinch of ash, a clean cloth, simple tools, used with care.
Traveling in the Middle Ages was not just about moving from one place to another. It was also about moving through the spaces and expectations of other people. Even after walking for hours, washing hands and face, airing clothing, and caring for hair, travelers had to consider another invisible yet powerful factor: smell. Odor mattered. Everyday odors. In the Middle Ages, smells were abundant. Animals lived close to people. Stables were near homes. Roads carried dust, manure, and the lingering scents of markets and cooking fires. Clothing and bodies absorbed these odors. Yet people developed tolerance. Strong odors were normal. They were expected. What stood out were unusual or unpleasant smells that signaled neglect, illness, or poor manners. A traveler who reeked of decay, mold, or unwashed waste might be avoided. One who carried only the mild, natural scents of body, linen, and herbs was acceptable and welcomed. Herbs as gentle scents. Herbs were the primary solution for controlling odor. Small bundles of lavender, rosemary, or sage could be placed among clothing or tucked into head coverings. These herbs did not mask the traveler's natural scent. They softened it. They made the presence of a human body less intrusive to others. Carried in a pouch, a cloth, or woven into clothing, herbs were quietly effective. They were used sparingly. Their scent was subtle, just enough to show care. Social expectations. Social norms shaped behavior more than written rules. Travelers learned quickly how to present themselves. Hair combed or tied, clothing shaken free of dust, feet aired, minimal odors. These small gestures were enough to gain acceptance. Hostels, inns, and monasteries judged travelers primarily by appearance and smell. Reasonable cleanliness was a sign of discipline, respect, and reliability. Being clean was a social signal. It conveyed that the traveler was aware of local customs and that they could be trusted in shared spaces. Balancing practicality and courtesy. Travelers had to balance hygiene with practicality. Walking long distances in wool and linen meant sweat and dust were inevitable. Washing could be limited by water availability, so travelers focused on what mattered most: partial washing of hands, face, and feet, airing linen, brushing wool, gentle use of herbs. These small acts were practical, but they also satisfied social expectations. Being acceptable did not mean being spotless.
It meant being clean enough, courteous enough, and considerate of others. Smell and clothing. Clothing played a large role in social perception. Wool cloaks and hoods were brushed and aired. Linen ships were rinsed or replaced when possible. Small amounts of herbs softened odors. Travelers understood that garments carried the first impression. Outer garments absorbed dust and dirt from roads. Keeping the inner layer clean allowed them to appear reasonable in shared spaces. A traveler might smell faintly of sweat, but if linen was dry and brushed, the scent was acceptable. Hygiene as courtesy. Travelers often shared rooms. Sleeping near others meant that odors were noticeable. Partial washing, airing of feet, and careful hair care were as much about comfort for others as for oneself. Travelers learned early that polite routines prevented friction and maintained harmony. These routines became instinctive. Even small children traveling with families absorbed them. Interactions with hosts. Being mindful of cleanliness improved interactions with innkeepers, monks, and householders. Clean enough travelers were welcomed, offered a place near the hearth, served food, given blankets or a straw bed. Travelers who ignored these social norms risked suspicion, discomfort, or refusal of service. Smell was one of the first signals others noticed. Managing odors during travel. Travelers had many quiet strategies: airing shoes and socks, rinsing linen or head coverings in streams, using herbs in pockets or sewn into clothing, carefully combing hair and beards. None of these acts required rush or energy. They were small, repetitive, calming actions, and they worked. Hygiene and health. Socially acceptable cleanliness was also health-promoting. Air, light, and water reduced parasites. Regular brushing of hair and clothing minimized lice. Partial washing prevented skin irritation. Even in a world without modern medicine, practical attention to odor and appearance reduced the risk of sickness. Travelers' routines were simple, yet remarkably effective. Quiet routines. Consider the calm rhythm of these actions: removing shoes and shaking out dust, brushing wool and combing hair, splashing cool water on hands and face, placing herbs near the body or in clothing. Each movement is gentle, slow, repetitive. These are not dramatic tasks, they are meditative. They prepare the body for rest and the traveler for continued movement. Acceptance on the road. Being clean enough, smelling mild, and showing care ensured that the traveler could move smoothly through villages, inns, and monasteries. Other travelers observed and learned these subtle norms. Social acceptance reinforced practical hygiene. Communities survived better when travelers followed these quiet rules. Reflection. The medieval traveler's approach to smell and social norms was not obsessive. It was thoughtful, practical, and calm. Small rituals of care allowed people to coexist comfortably, even in close quarters, even while on the road for weeks or months. Through gentle attention to scent, clothing, and personal habits, travelers maintained both social harmony and personal health. As we move forward, we'll explore why these small, repetitive habits actually worked, and how they contributed to survival and comfort on long journeys. For now, imagine the quiet of a shared inn-room, the faint aroma of herbs, shaken clothing, combed hair, a traveler resting, calm and clean enough, ready for sleep.
When we look back at medieval travelers and the routines they followed, it is easy to think that their methods were primitive, that without modern plumbing, soap, or medicine, hygiene must have been ineffective. And yet, those small, quiet actions accomplished a remarkable amount. They worked because they were simple, consistent, and mindful of the environment. They were designed not for perfection, but for survival and comfort over long distances. Reducing dirt and debris. Shaking and brushing clothing removed much of the dust and dirt accumulated during travel. Wool cloaks, hoods, and outer garments collected road dust, tree pollen, and soil. By gently shaking and brushing these fabrics, travelers prevented dirt from pressing against the skin, which reduced irritation and chafing. Even partial washing of linen shifts removed sweat and surface oils. This small action kept the body feeling fresher and more comfortable. Airflow and drying. Airing clothing and bedding played a critical role. Moisture trapped in fabrics or on the skin encouraged discomfort, skin rashes, and sometimes infections. By hanging garments near a fire, a window, or a sunny spot, travelers allowed moisture to evaporate. This reduced microbial growth, dried sweat from the skin, and preserved warmth for the night. Dry clothing also made sleep more comfortable. A dry body retained heat better, preventing illness from cold or damp conditions. Partial washing. Partial washing, hands, face, and feet, was deceptively effective. Hands were most likely to touch food, surfaces, and other people. Clean hands reduced the transfer of germs and pathogens. Face washing removed dust and sweat, preventing irritation and discomfort. Feet, which endured long hours of walking, were washed to prevent blisters, fungal infections, and sores.
Even a small rinse made a noticeable difference in comfort and mobility. Hair and parasite control. Hair combing and head coverings were not simply aesthetic. Parasites, especially lice, were common along medieval roads. Daily combing removed many lice and nits before they could multiply. Head coverings reduced exposure to flies, dust, and dirt. Braiding hair or tying it back minimized tangling and contact with contaminated surfaces. These simple routines maintained health in ways travelers could feel, even without understanding germs. Use of natural cleansers. Ash, sand, and mild soaps removed grease and grime. Herbs softened odors and sometimes had antimicrobial properties. Oils protected the skin and hair from drying and cracking. Even though these substances were modest and often improvised, they complemented the physical routines: brushing, shaking, partial washing, and airing. Together, these methods created a system that minimized discomfort and risk. Sleep and rest. Hygiene was intertwined with rest. Clean enough clothing, aired bedding, and washed skin allowed travelers to sleep more soundly. Sleep was a form of hygiene. A rested body recovered faster, stayed warmer, and resisted illness more effectively. Gentle nighttime rituals, washing, arranging bedding, combing hair, functioned as preparation for restorative rest. Mindfulness and consistency. Part of the effectiveness of medieval hygiene came from mindfulness. Each action was small but done regularly. Repeated over days and weeks, these small habits compounded into significant health benefits. Travelers learned to notice discomfort, respond to it gently, and prevent it from worsening. Even in unpredictable conditions, rain, mud, wind, dust, these consistent practices maintain balance. Social reinforcement. Hygiene also benefited from social observation. Travelers traveling in groups, staying in inns, or visiting monasteries were subtly guided by social expectations. Being clean enough to be accepted by hosts and fellow travelers ensured a degree of conformity and consistency. Social norms reinforced personal care, and personal care reinforced survival. Environmental adaptation. Travelers adapted to the environment. They used streams for washing, sun and wind for drying, ash, sand, and herbs from the roadside. They understood local conditions. They adjusted their routines according to weather, season, and available resources. This adaptability made their methods surprisingly effective. The holistic effect. When we combine all these factors, it becomes clear why medieval hygiene, though simple, worked. Partial washing reduced sweat and irritation. Hair care controlled parasites. Clothing and bedding management maintained dryness and warmth. Herbs and mild cleansers softened odors. Social awareness encouraged consistent behavior. Together, these small, gentle actions protected health, ensured social acceptance, and supported long-distance travel. Reflection. There is a quiet wisdom in these routines. Modern travelers may rely on technology, showers, and packaged products. Medieval travelers relied on observation, care, and small, repeated acts. Their success did not depend on perfection. It depended on attention, consistency, and mindfulness. Each step, washing a hand, airing a cloak, brushing hair, was part of a larger system. A system that allowed people to cross countries, mountains, and rivers, to reach destinations safely, and to rest at night, ready to continue the journey. The meditative rhythm. Consider the rhythm of these habits. The splash of cool water on hands, the gentle brushing of wool and hair, the shaking out of clothing and bedding, the placement of herbs nearby, the careful removal of shoes at night. Each action is deliberate, slow, and calming. Even after hours of walking, the traveler moves with quiet intention, preparing body and mind for rest. This is hygiene as meditation, hygiene as survival, hygiene as calm. Conclusion. In the end, these small practices were enough. Travelers remained mobile, relatively comfortable, and socially accepted. They preserved health, protected the body from extreme conditions, and created moments of calm during long journeys. And perhaps most importantly, these routines reminded them, and remind us today, that small, mindful, repeated acts can create remarkable results. As we continue the story, the final chapters will explore food, waste management, and maintaining cleanliness over extended journeys, all in the same slow, relaxing, long-form style. For now, imagine the traveler resting at dusk, hands clean, feet aired, hair combed, clothing shaken and dry, calm, ready, balanced.
For travelers in the medieval world, eating and drinking were not merely acts of sustenance. They were integral parts of hygiene, comfort, and survival. Without modern kitchens, clean plates, or bottled water, every meal required careful attention. A traveler who ate unwisely or drank unsafe water risked illness, sometimes serious, even life-threatening. And yet, with simple care, basic routines, and gentle attention, it was possible to travel long distances safely. Food on the road. Most travelers carried food with them. Dried bread, hard biscuits, salted meat, cheese, and dried fruit were common. These items were chosen because they traveled well, resisted spoilage, and required minimal preparation. Food itself could accumulate dust or contaminants during travel. Bread wrapped in cloth, cheese kept in small boxes, and dried meat stored in clean pouches were ways travelers maintained hygiene before eating. Even small acts, wiping hands or the eating surface, helped reduce exposure to germs. The importance of clean hands. Hands were constantly exposed to road dust, animals, coins, and clothing. Before eating, travelers washed their hands in a basin or stream whenever possible. Soap, when available, was used sparingly. Water alone removed much of the visible dirt. Even cold water was sufficient for basic hygiene. These small rituals not only protected the traveler's health, but also showed courtesy to companions and hosts. Eating in motion. Sometimes meals were eaten while walking. A traveler might take a quick bite of bread or cheese along the roadside. Even then, attention to hygiene mattered. Dirt could be brushed off hands, or a piece of cloth could be used as a napkin. Food was not handled carelessly. Clean hands and careful placement reduced contamination. Meals on the move were simple, slow, and deliberate. Travelers learned to eat efficiently, yet mindfully. Drinking water. Water posed a unique challenge. Streams and wells were the primary sources, but water quality varied dramatically. Clear, flowing streams were ideal. Stagnant pools were risky. Travelers learned to select the best sources. Water might be collected in a wooden cup, a leather bag, or a small gourd. Before drinking, travelers sometimes allowed water to settle, or poured it back and forth to remove sediment. Herbs and boiling. When possible, water was boiled or treated with herbs. Mint, rosemary, and thyme were sometimes added. Not only did they improve flavor, but they also reduced unpleasant odors and made the water safer to drink. Even without full understanding of germs, travelers noticed that certain practices prevented illness. Herbs and gentle boiling became part of their quiet, careful routines. Eating with others. Sharing meals required additional attention. Travelers ate in groups, in inns, or alongside companions in barns or monasteries. Being clean and orderly signaled respect. Hands were washed. Cloths were used. Care was taken to avoid spilling crumbs or crumbs from bread onto shared surfaces. Small acts of hygiene reinforced social cohesion. They made the journey smoother, safer, and more comfortable. Utensils and clean surfaces. Travelers often carried simple utensils, wooden spoons, small knives, or cups. These tools were cleaned after every meal. Ash, sand, and water were often enough to remove grease and food particles. Even minimal attention prevented contamination of future meals. A clean spoon or cup was as much as a necessity as clean hands. Managing waste after meals. Waste management during travel was handled with care. Food scraps were rarely thrown indiscriminately. They might be buried, fed to animals, or disposed of in flowing water. Dishwater, often used for washing hands or utensils, was poured away from sleeping areas. Travelers understood intuitively that proximity of waste to rest areas caused discomfort, odor, and sometimes illness. Managing personal cleanliness after eating. Meals were opportunities to reinforce personal hygiene. Hands were rinsed carefully. Faces were wiped to remove crumbs or grease. Clothing that had been exposed to spills or dirt was adjusted or shaken out. Even small, repeated actions mattered. They prevented long-term discomfort and helped maintain social acceptance along the road. Nighttime eating rituals. Sometimes travelers ate near the end of the day. Dinner might be simple: bread, cheese, and dried fruit. A gentle wash of hands afterward, perhaps rinsing a cup or bowl, followed by airing clothing or adjusting bedding, completed a quiet, meditative ritual that ended the day. These small acts prepared the body for rest. Clean hands, dry clothing, and calm movements allowed sleep to come more easily. Food, water, and the mind. Travelers understood something subtle. Clean eating habits supported not only physical health, but mental calm. Sitting by a stream to rinse hands, slowly unpacking a loaf of bread, gently rinsing a wooden cup. These actions were quiet, repetitive, and soothing. They created rhythm, they created control, and they minimized anxiety about dirt or illness. Observation and adaptation. Experienced travelers learned from observation.
They watched locals and fellow travelers, noticed which streams were safe, which inns maintained reasonable cleanliness, and how others handled utensils and food. Knowledge accumulated slowly. It was practical, quiet, and applied with patience. Reflection. When we imagine a medieval traveler resting for a moment, eating a simple meal along a dusty road, we can see the careful interplay of hygiene, observation, and care. Hands rinsed in cool water, bread wrapped in cloth, water sipped from a small cup, herbs softening odors, clothing adjusted and aired. Every small choice maintained comfort, health, and social acceptance. Calm and routine. The pattern of eating, washing, and resting forms a rhythm. Each day, travelers repeated these actions in quiet, gentle ways. Over weeks or months, these routines became habit. Habit became survival. And through repetition, the long journey became manageable, even in the absence of modern conveniences. Closing thoughts. Travelers in the medieval world understood balance. They understood moderation. They understood rhythm. They understood small acts of care repeated consistently. By focusing on basic hygiene while eating and drinking, they maintained health, minimized discomfort, and moved steadily along their paths. And even in simple, quiet ways, they created calm, meditative moments that carried them safely from day to day.
For medieval travelers, one of the quietest, most practical aspects of hygiene was the management of waste. On a long journey, far from towns, inns, or flowing rivers, every traveler had to think carefully about where and how to relieve the body. It was not glamorous, it was not hurried, but it was essential for health, comfort, and social acceptance. Understanding the environment. Travelers quickly learned that location mattered. A place downwind of the sleeping area prevented odor from lingering. Soil that absorbed waste allowed the ground to remain relatively dry and comfortable. Proximity to water required caution. Contamination could make drinking water unsafe. Observation was key. Travelers watched the land, the sun, and the flow of water. Even small choices in where to relieve oneself had lasting effects. Digging a simple hole. One of the most common techniques was digging a small hole, or latrine pit. A stick or small tool could mark the spot. Afterward, the waste was covered carefully with soil. This prevented odors from accumulating and reduced the risk of spreading disease. The act was slow and deliberate. Travelers treated it as a small, private ritual. It was completed with care and attention. Use of streams and rivers. When streams or rivers were nearby, some travelers used flowing water. Waste was deposited downstream, away from where people gathered, slept, or drank. Even in this simple method, travelers exercised awareness. Choosing water away from the main drinking source. Depositing waste in moving water to carry it away. Washing hands afterward in clean sections of the stream. These practices minimized contamination and maintained relative cleanliness. Hygiene afterward. After relieving themselves, travelers performed small, gentle acts to restore cleanliness. Rinsing hands in water, sometimes with a pinch of ash if available. Wiping with a cloth or leaves. Airing clothing if soiled. Adjusting hair or head coverings. Even these small gestures made a profound difference over the long term. They prevented discomfort, skin irritation, and social friction. Traveling in groups. Group travel introduced additional considerations. Shared knowledge was important. Designating appropriate spots, avoiding areas near campsites or sleeping spaces, ensuring everyone followed similar routines. Travelers who ignored these practices could disturb companions or bring illness to the group. Cooperation became part of hygiene on the road. Portable containers. Some travelers carried small containers, especially in colder weather. Wooden, leather, or ceramic vessels allowed waste to be stored temporarily. It could then be disposed of responsibly when reaching a suitable site. This practice required foresight, patience, and care. It allowed the traveler to maintain both cleanliness and dignity in challenging conditions. Minimizing odors. Travelers understood that waste could attract flies, insects, and pests.
Covering excrement with soil, sand, or ash reduced odor. Wind direction was noted, and spots were chosen carefully to avoid contamination of sleeping areas or food. Even without scientific understanding, these methods worked remarkably well. They prevented discomfort and maintained a degree of hygiene. The role of clothing. Clothing often absorbed minor contamination. Travelers learned to shake out outer layers, air linen and wool, wash hands and forearms, remove shoes or boots if necessary. These simple steps limited the spread of germs and kept the body as clean as possible under road conditions. Nighttime and early morning considerations. Managing waste at night required caution. Travelers slept lightly, especially in unfamiliar areas. Relieving oneself in the dark required familiarity with the environment. Selecting safe locations away from bedding. Using tools or sticks for digging if soil was frozen or compact. Washing hands immediately afterward. Morning routines then reinforced cleanliness, airing bedding and clothing, rinsing hands and face, and adjusting hair and head coverings. Lessons from medieval practice. Medieval travelers developed an intuitive understanding of hygiene through repetition and observation. Water, even cold, was enough for partial washing. Ash, sand, and herbs assisted in cleanliness. Hair and clothing routines minimized parasites. Sleep, careful bedding, and airing prevented discomfort. Waste was managed deliberately and thoughtfully. All of these practices were simple, but combined they allowed travelers to survive long journeys, maintain health, and coexist peacefully with others. Reflection. When we reflect on these quiet routines, there is a sense of order and calm. Travelers moved deliberately. They acted with mindfulness. They respected the environment, themselves and their companions. Every action, from brushing hair to shaking out a cloak, from rinsing a cup to covering waste with soil, was small, meditative, and effective. Closing the journey. Consider a traveler at dusk after a long day. Hands washed in cool water, feet aired and soothed, hair combed, head coverings adjusted, clothing shaken, herbs placed for subtle scent, waste carefully disposed, simple food eaten, cup rinsed, and utensils cleaned. The traveler rests, calm, balanced, and ready for another day. This quiet rhythm carried people across countries, mountains, and rivers. It created order, comfort, and subtle joy, even in a world without modern conveniences. Final thought. Hygiene on the medieval road was not about perfection. It was about care, mindfulness, and gentle repetition. By paying attention to small actions, travelers stayed healthy, maintained social acceptance, and found moments of calm and rest along the journey. And in this quiet rhythm, washing hands, combing hair, shaking clothing, disposing waste, they discovered a form of meditation, a slow, soothing way to move through the world.